Here at Economist Impact, we really think a lot about how are different kind of economic and sustainability systems impacting people. It'd be great to hear a little bit about what is the scale of the water access problem and what is the impact on people?
Okay. The scale is pretty massive. There's 771 million people who don't have access to safe water, and about 1.7 billion who lack access to adequate sanitation. So the problem's massive, and not something that I really knew about until about 16 or 17 years ago when I first started learning about it. What it really means is there's the health aspect, which is you've got 400,000 kids under the age of 5 who die every year because they don't have access, and they die of completely preventable illnesses. Something like diarrhea can be a life-threatening situation for somebody in the developing world, whereas for our kids it's obviously maybe a missed day of school and some rehydration, and they're back on their feet. So it's needless, senseless, and really unconscionable death of totally innocent kids. So, but leaving that aside, the issue disproportionately affects women and girls. Primarily, women and girls are doing the water collections if a family lacks access. And what that means is women can't work at jobs and bring money into their family, or girls aren't in school because they're spending their entire day wandering around trying to find water. And so that's really the impact. What you see are just these lives that are completely robbed of their potential. These girls are not allowed to live up to their promise. They don't have dreams or ambitions because they can't. Their life revolves around essentially scavenging for water so that their family can survive from day to day.
So we know those kind of lives are also impacted by big structural changes like climate. I mean, we're here at New York Climate Week. We're looking forward to COP28. What is the link between water and climate, and why are we at Climate Week thinking about it?
Well, it's a huge concern for us on the access side because the climate change is going to be felt first and worst by the poorest people on Earth, and what we're seeing, and the concern for us is that while we're making great strides and we are moving in the right direction, the UN has recently said that climate threatens water access, and these numbers, like the 771 million that I just told you, there's a threat that number could double, so we could backslide, and that's a real concern for us.
Yeah, and just to build off of what you said, Matt, I think climate is really felt through the water cycle. So we won't have enough water in some places, we'll have too much water in other places, and then sometimes we'll have unpredictable water, so you don't know when the rains are going to come and how much is going to come. And that means that that access could worsen, exactly as you said, and people who are connected now, their systems might not function anymore because of these challenges, really because of climate change.
Yeah, that's why we've moved into this, which we'll get to, I guess, but these climate resilient infrastructure is a real focus for us.
Yeah, well, let's get into some of the solutions around this. You co-founded water.org, and also Water Equity has been a recent offshoot of that. Can you talk a little bit about how you thought about where did Water Equity come from in terms of the process of thinking about solutions?
Sure. Water Equity came out of a trip that Gary and I took to, Gary White, my co-founder, and I were in India together, and we were kind of informally polling our microfinance partners about what the kind of bottlenecks were for them. And all of them, independent of one another, reported back that access to affordable capital was the main issue for them and the main choke point. And so that got us thinking about, all right, how do we get more money into this system? And that was where we came up with kind of inventing an asset manager and hiring geniuses to come help us with it. And really, what we do is use the philanthropy to kind of de-risk and find these bankable deals, and then we can bring the investment side in behind, so that the two, so water.org and Water Equity are really working together.
Yeah, just to build off of that again, if that's okay.
Build off everything, please.
Yeah, no, I think that typically you think about water as being either a government problem or a philanthropic problem, but it's also, there's an opportunity for investment capital to come in because the size of the challenge is so huge. We really need the capital markets. to come in. And I think the innovation that Gary and Matt founded through water.org is really about recognizing that there's a market solution to a piece of the water crisis, and that we can really scale that up by bringing in capital.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think Gary was the first really to realize, just going back even further, that people in these poor communities were already paying for water, right? So they, in most cases, they were paying 15 times what the middle and upper class were because they weren't connected to the existing infrastructure. And so knowing that they were paying all this money for water, in some cases 25% of their own incomes, right? Because what would you do for that first gallon of water? Obviously, it's your whole life depends on it. He realized that while they were paying all this money day in and day out, they didn't have any savings. And so if we could actually front them the money with a microloan, it'd essentially be an income enhancing loan. We would buy their time back, and they would be able to be productive with that time and pay the loan back. And so it was an idea that seems obvious in retrospect, but it was a pretty big thought leap for the microfinance institutions at the time. And so we spent a number of years proving the model, and then we got the microfinance institutions involved, and then we're able to bring it to scale.
Yeah, I mean, working on microfinance is one thing, but when you're talking about, for example, finding bankable projects for resilient infrastructure, that's sort of a systemic problem. So what's the link between those two?
Yeah, so I think microfinance is really important in getting people connected to that access. It usually is $500 or $1,000 that they don't have. So if there is a piped water network that might be running right under your feet, but you can't connect to it because you don't have that $1,000 that it takes to connect to the piped network. But if there isn't a pipe network near you, or if it's not functional, that's where we need to really invest in that infrastructure itself and the system as a whole. And then we really need to think bigger about how it fits in with other actors. So partnering with governments, partnering with developers who are working on these projects, and ultimately building a pipeline of climate resilient infrastructure that we can invest in to make sure that access is available to everybody.
Great. I mean, you talk about some of these stakeholders, right? I mean, it's everything from the last mile and the actual consumer, but going up to, as you mentioned, local governments and utilities. So what is the most effective route? What are the most effective stakeholders that you work with to get that dollar to go the furthest in terms of having impact?
I can take that one. Yeah. No, I think that there is interesting innovation happening in the water space. Like we've seen in the past that water is only about 1% of infrastructure investments, of private investments into infrastructure, and that share really needs to grow. And the challenge has been finding partners that are ready to take on that private capital. So it's identifying where are the markets that governments are ready to partner with the private sector, and where are there projects that have been designed for private sector to come in. It's not saying that the private sector is going to own and operate, or own the infrastructure itself, but rather that they can be a partner in making sure that there is that resilient access that we can provide. Starting from the very beginning of that design process is where the philanthropic dollars in water.org can be really important, and then water equity can come in with the capital that we need to make it happen.
Yeah, but the role of water.org really in those cases is to make sure that the deals is to find the bankable deals and make sure that they can make sense for our investors. Because really, if depending on how the products are structured, we need to make sure that people can come in. As someone said the other day, so human beings can be human beings, or in the capitalist sense, and will come in, and the real money can flow in and get these things going.
So what is a bankable project? I mean, how do you de-risk a project that otherwise might be difficult for investors and make it something really attractive?
It's about the structure of risk. So who's taking on which aspect of risk? So I can give an example. In fecal sludge treatment, which is, I know, the sexiest topic that we all like to talk about, but it's a huge issue because most of the world is not connected to a sewage network. So their toilet flushes to a septic tank, and that tank has to go, once it's full, has to go somewhere. So thinking about how to set up fecal sludge treatment plants, these are not big sewage treatment plants. They're usually pretty small scale. They're not capital intensive, but you have to structure it right so that the payer of that service isn't necessarily the person who's getting their fecal sludge pumped. So thinking about partnering with governments who are ready to take on some of that cost because they recognize the benefits that can come from investing in things like fecal sludge treatment, the productivity gains that can be achieved because there isn't raw sewage everywhere are really enormous. Some of the health impacts that Matt talked about before are directly linked to, is that sewage actually being treated? So
And the greenhouse gases too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the great thing about fecal sludge as an investment is the market's never going to collapse. So.
The great thing about fecal sludge is an investment. I think we're going to use that as that's going to come out of this interview. Well, we talk about things like resiliency. You brought up the idea of a resilient water system. At Economist Impact, we do a lot of research in resilient water systems, sustainable water systems. But what is the difference there? I mean, how do you think about resiliency? How do you measure something like that?
I mean, I think about it in terms of always from the perspective of access and the people that we're trying to serve, and making sure that they can weather the kind of the coming storm of and the climate crisis, and also can we improve that infrastructure if we're building it out for the infrastructure itself to be resilient and less wasteful. There's something, it's like 35 to 60% of the water that we just lose to leakage, which has a massive carbon cost if you think about, how heavy water is, and to treat it, to move it, only to have it kind of leach out into the ground. It's incredibly wasteful. And you have to think of that water that's going into the ground really as carbon, because it is. And then you're going to have to replace it with water that it's going to have to go through that process again. So it feels like there are huge gains in terms of mitigation to be made there, as well as the obvious adaptation side to having climate resilient infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, efficiency and leakage seem to be such a low-hanging fruit.
It does. It really does. But yet it's not something that it's something that we've kind of been trying to circle that square for people so that they can see the kind of carbon cost of that, because it doesn't come to front of mind, it seems, for a lot of people.
Sure. And how does calculating that resilience play into an investment decision, or whether this is a great place to deploy capital?
Yeah, it's really core to what we do, and we always think of the person who's going to get that access first. So first we want to make sure that the investment is going to benefit the vulnerable that need that access. And then on top of that, we want to make sure that they are provided access that's going to be reliable even in the face of all these climate disasters that might happen, whether it's drought that affects the water supply or flooding that might overwhelm a sewage treatment plant. We want to make sure that they can live resilient lives in the face of climate change through this access to reliable infrastructure. So we look at on a really close level for each deal, what are the challenges that are going to be faced in that city because of climate change, and is the design of this infrastructure fit for purpose, essentially, and will it provide what's needed for the next 30, 40, 50 years?
And what does that mean in practice? I mean, can you give me some examples of where you've worked with, for example, water managers or local governments, and how do you sort of set that scene?
So we're at the early stages of launching the strategy, but I think what we've seen is that resilience is not front of mind for people who are running utilities or for people in government who are focused on water. Access is really first as top of mind for them. But we are trying to educate and show that access and resilience really have to work together, that actually if you don't really think resilience first, access is not going to be sustainable, and you're going to essentially waste your money in this investment. So we focus on those early conversations with the developers that we're working with to understand, have you considered resilience? Usually the answer is not yet, but they recognize that it's a business critical issue, because if their infrastructure isn't functioning, they're not going to be getting their payments from users or from government. So building in resilience into the business model, I think, can be a key to unlocking kind of that insight for the people who are designing projects.
Great. And when you think about making these investments, I'm really interested in technology. I mean, we talked about something as easy as leakage, but it seems like innovation and technology is opening up all these new avenues, right, that have all this potential, right, for improving things like access and lives of the poor. What are some things that excite you when you think about
I mean, I'm not the engineer or the tech guy, but there are definitely things that are coming down, and things as simple as sensors and things like that are going to be incredibly helpful in the next generation infrastructure stuff. But the innovations for us are, we're around water credit, we're around kind of looking at the issue in a different way, convincing people, like the hurdles we always had to clear. We're trying to convince people that these ideas would work, and kind of trust-based philanthropy, and rather than give us dollars for a well, give us dollars for this idea that we have, and give us dollars to de-risk a loan portfolio. Like, that's a very different way to think about philanthropy. But in terms of the tech stuff, I don't know, is there anything coming down the pike that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say we're not tech investors. There is a lot of exciting stuff happening in water tech, but what we see is that the technology that's out there isn't being used where it's needed most. And if we can invest in these projects that are designed right, we can kind of leapfrog. So in the US, our infrastructure is aging. Let's build infrastructure that we know can really function very well in emerging markets where it might not exist yet. So things like sensors to make sure that pressure is optimized, leak detection, metered billing can be a really important way to increase the financial sustainability of utilities. Really relatively simple stuff. It's not super in-depth AI that we're looking at. It's stuff that's already being used here in the US. How can we bring that to countries where it's really needed?
Yeah. I'm really interested, I mean, I'm going to nerd out a little bit, but what are some of the metrics around success and impact that you guys are looking at? I mean, how do you know when you've done the right thing? Is it just number of people getting access, or is it more than that?
I mean, that's how I look at it, yeah, for sure. And that number is accelerating, and that we're looking around the corner at making sure that there's not going to be another choke point, because there always is, right? So what's the next hurdle? And that's how that we pivoted to this infrastructure, this top-down solution, right? Because we've been solely bottom-up until now. But we want to do parallel tracks. Obviously, we want to keep going with what's working so well, and especially there are still so many people who with need that we can meet that need. But the next big step is trying to get these two things to meet in the middle, I would say.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think number of people and how we reach them is really always our motivating impulse for every investment that we're making.
And it's like Gary, when we started out, he had as part of water.org a new ventures fund, right? So unrestricted dollars, some of them would go to this new ventures fund, and it was a very different way to think about this stuff. And like, had we just drilled wells, which was what we did very well. Very well, I say, because half the water projects historically fail within 5 years. A lot of these well systems, but Gary's approach was so community-led and involved such buy-in from these communities that his well systems were sustained. But had we just kept doing that, which we were very good at doing, it would have taken us 400 years to reach the 58 million people that we've reached, because we innovated and came up with water credit. And so that's what we're always looking towards. What is the next thing to keep accelerating the people that we're reaching, and hopefully without any backsliding due to climate change.
Yeah, and I think because we see that connection to climate as being so important, we're also looking at what are some of the things that we need to achieve to reach those people, and we're focusing or sort of expanding our focus from just access to also thinking about how do you improve water quality, how do you reduce pollution in freshwater bodies, and how do you mitigate the effects of water scarcity. Those are two huge issues that I think have not enough attention paid to them. So measuring those impacts and really talking about that, I think, can also help others understand the magnitude of the problem.
I mean, you talked a little bit about water scarcity. You mentioned adaptation a little bit earlier. I mean, when we think about the changing climate, how does that impact the kind of challenges that you're looking at, and how do your investments sort of take that into account? I mean, how is the world going to be different in a few years when it comes to water investment?
It's a crisis now for the people that we're trying to reach. So it is an emergency right now for people who don't have access. There's 800 million people essentially that don't have access. So I don't see it as something that is going to change when it gets a few degrees warmer. I think climate resilient systems are definitely going to be needed, but I still feel like it's an emergency right now for the people that we're trying to reach. I don't know if you would.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think the problem is going to get worse, not better. But I think what's positive is that everyone's feeling the effects of climate change now, no matter where you live, essentially. So I think there's more recognition that water, and reliable water, is key everywhere.
There's no question that it's on the minds of people in America now for the first time. I mean, yeah, like I saw the mayor of Phoenix I bumped into at an event and I went, oh my gosh, I just read that your city was, 110 degrees for 54 straight days or something like that. And so I feel like it's in the consciousness of Americans now, which is good. In a way that 20 years ago, people weren't thinking about this really at all. Even it wasn't even a Millennium Development Goal. Water didn't even make the list, and so. But it's certainly made its way into the public consciousness. I think because we're seeing these natural disasters that are three quarters of them are water based, and people are starting to feel it in their own lives.
Yeah, we think about this as a developing world problem, but it seems like it's a here and now thing as well.
Sure, yeah. We were just with somebody who was dealing with it expressly in America the other day, and the water basin issue here, and the Colorado River, and all of that. So it's, it's definitely top of mind for people here now too.
Yeah, and I think companies are starting to recognize the importance of water to their own ability to continue operating. And so seeing the private sector corporations really come on board and seeing this as a business critical issue, I think is a real positive change, because we need everybody to be supporting this. So that's one way that in the future things are going to be done differently, because it's going to be recognized that this is a collective problem, and so we need to work together to fix it.
Great. Just a last question. Looking to the future, what's your ambition? I mean, 5 years from now, where do you want water equity and water.org to be?
We want to put ourselves out of business. That's really always been the goal. But look, it's been very exciting. I mean, it was 2012 when we hit our first 1 million people that we reached, and now we're hitting 1 million people every 6 weeks, and so that's really exciting, and we want to keep that acceleration. If we stay just on the track we're on now, then in 5 years that's almost another 50 million people. But we're hoping that we can accelerate even more. And that this infrastructure, climate resilient infrastructure, is as successful as this other programming has been. That would be the dream.
Yeah, we want to reach 100 million people through this investment strategy, and we really see a way to do it.
Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you guys. Yeah, thanks for your time. Really
of course.
appreciate it.
All right.